Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for the next panel. We're going to start in 1 minute. So we do have time for questions and answers if you wish to do that, and I'll just share that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for coming to ICA's Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas Pavilion. Welcome. Please take your seats. We're going to get started with our next panel. My name is Margaret Ziegler. I'm with ICA United States. Every year at COP, we welcome those from the Americas and beyond to join us in these conversations about how we can really improve the agriculture system and food systems and really be leaders in this space. So we're glad you're here with us for another conversation today. And I'm going to turn it over shortly here to Jamie Adams with USDA with the Aim for Climate Initiative, and you'll hear a lot more about that. It's a special initiative created 2 years ago, I believe. Partnership initially between United States and the United Arab Emirates, with many, many more countries and partners now joining. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Jamie and we'll kick off our next panel. Again, thank you all for coming and enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and thank you, Margaret, for the introduction. My name is Jamie Adams. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and as Margaret mentioned, the United States lead for the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, Aim for Climate. Thank you so much for joining us today for the panel, Working Together to Promote Climate Resilience on Farm, where we'll be exploring the nexus of technology, farming practices, climate adaptation, and policy. This conversation with our esteemed panelists today aims to share innovative real-world solutions to climate resilience, fostering farmer-centric approaches, so critically important, and crafting actionable strategies and policies to support research, development, and application of agricultural innovation. So without further ado, the structure of the panel today, we're going to start with introductions of our panelists, and after each introduction, the panelists will provide a brief statement and opening remarks, tell us a little bit about themselves, what brings them to COP28, and then we're going to go into some moderated panel Q&A, and if time allows, we'll have time at the end for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So to kick it off, I'll start by going to Sophie Beecher. Sophie joins us from Canada. She's the Director General, Sustainable Development Policy Directorate at Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada. So Sophie, over to you. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to and give us a brief opening statement.
Yep, absolutely. So we are here representing the Department of Agriculture for Canada. Most of us, 3/4 of the delegation, is actually from the policy branch. And so the eternal question is, how do you sort of set the vision for the sector and the federal government from a policy standpoint in light of everything that we're hearing about? You know, we hear throughout the COP, we hear a lot about the farmer perspective in agriculture, about specific technology, financial mechanisms. We in policy have the very difficult role of bringing all of this together, figuring out how all the pieces, you know, can sort of work and build upon each other, address short-term objectives, take into account the broader targets and objectives set by our environmental department, you know, go back to the farm at the ground level and, you know, see if everything applies, and also address the long-term objectives. So set the stage for 20 years from now. You know, you have to start planning for that. You have to start the transformation right away. It's very challenging to bring all of that together. And so you know, that's what we aim to do. Currently we are working, the Department of Agriculture, on developing a sustainable agriculture strategy to set that vision. And we very much hope that it is well received and does set the course for the future. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next we'll go to Christian Herbert, the Global Farmer Network President and CEO of Herbert Group. So what brings you to COP28? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Yeah, so I don't always like to say it, but I guess I'm just a farmer. Traveled
No one's
over-
ever just a
No,
farmer.
no, exactly. Traveled over to talk about agriculture with everybody at COP, and so we have a 30,000 acre grain farm in Saskatchewan, Canada. It's kind of an hour from the American border. We grow canola, wheat, malt barley, oats, yellow peas, fall rye, so a variety of crops. And kind of what led us down this path is we got named a global climate leader by Corteva a couple of years back, which took me to Brussels to start some of these conversations, and it opened my eyes, I guess, to the amount of attention and money behind the whole carbon movement and climate movement, etc. I got asked a couple questions yesterday that said, "Do you think farmers are climate skeptics?" And I said, to be honest, if I let you out to have coffee on my deck in Saskatchewan at 6 o'clock in the morning and you saw the wind blowing through the trees and my canola crops, floating in the wind, that's the reason sometimes is we don't always feel that close to maybe pollution or climate change until, we go through droughts and hailstorms, etc. So that's what led us here. I kind of have a personal definition of sustainability that I need to leave the land, the financial statements, the community, and the industry in a better state generation after generation. And I can't sit on my couch and complain about that or sit in my tractor and complain about it. So as farmers, we need to step up and be part of the conversation with government, with multinational companies, etc. And if we want policy to work in our favor, we better be part of the discussion.
Yep, absolutely. And farmers' voices are so critically important to the entire conversation. And with that, next we'll also go to another representative from Australia, David Johinke, who's the president of the Australian Farmers Federation. Welcome, and let us know a little bit about your organization. What brings you to COP?
First of all, very much a similar story. I'm a third-generation farmer from somewhere between Horsham. Well, Horsham's the place between Melbourne and Adelaide. A little place called Murrawarra, which is aptly Aboriginal name for place of no water. Which Grandpa didn't quite understand when he selected the area, but from that, we're broadacre dryland farmers. We've adopted a lot of technology to make sure that we're maximising the rainfall we do have. And even in my career, we've seen the change in the environment around us. We've seen the changes and needed to make the changes to ensure that we're still productive. But as a part of that, I've been quite honoured to obviously represent our farmers across the board in Australia. And we have a very diverse landscape. We're quite large, very similar to Canada in the sense that we have extremes from both wet and dry, hot and cold. The effects of both the oceans, the El Niños, our Indian dipoles have a huge effect on the season. But the fact that we're seeing more acute extremes for prolonged periods is causing a lot of the, I guess, skeptics in some way. And we do have that same range as well between the very hardcore, we need to change, and the it's not really happening, it's all a furphy, and most of us are in the middle somewhere, but we do have the extremes as well that we're taking along on the journey. But for us, it's about also demonstrating the credentials that we've already done. We've adopted a lot of technology. We've actually done a lot of things to stay sustainable. But how do you describe that on a global platform? How do you tell that to people on the other side of the world that our story is as important, as dynamic as planting a tree or putting a solar panel in, or the other mechanisms that you can do to offset the traditional views of carbon and how we are both complying to or changing our farming practices. So telling that story is why we're here. And hopefully out of panels like this, and noting that most of us are in agriculture, I dare say, getting into the other sectors, especially when we talk about financial, when we come to policy, they're driving the conversation around some of the obligations that they need to do, especially around Scope 3 reporting, how we play a part of that, and making sure that our production isn't clipped because of that as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And we're all here today because a farmer woke up and went out on the farm and enabled you to have the coffee and the pastries and everything that brought you here and gave you the energy to go to your job. So thank you so much for those comments. And last but not least, we will go to Dr. Samira Amalal, the Director General, CEO, CropLife Africa and Middle East. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Dr. Samira Amalal, Director General of CropLife Africa Middle East. We are representing the leading manufacturers of crop protection, seeds, and biotechnology, and we are part of the global network of CropLife International. We represent 22 national associations across the region, from Jordan to South Africa. And it's a pleasure to be here to interact on crucial subjects on the climate change mitigation measure, agricultural solution, and food security. And this is especially very important as Arabic African women coming from a region where food security is very crucial. So just to give you some statistic, in Africa, there is 60% of population face of food insecurity, and in MENA region are approximately 30%. So this is to interact about around the food security, agriculture solution is very, very important, as agriculture is the heart of our growth of economy and society, and they relies on smallholder farmers. So without smallholder farmers, the food system cannot be able to function in our region. So unfortunately, they are faced of all this climate change crisis, and they are faced of emerging pests and diseases, so from desert black locust. And if you know, one of small swarm, so they can consume amount of food approximately of 35,000 of people. So I'm glad to be here to interact with the farmers around the world, so to learn from their experience on best practice of farming and how they have also used these technologies and agricultural solution to grow the productivity in their continent. So thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone for your opening statements. Now we'll go into some questions with the panel. So let's start it with Sophie. I'll come to you first. How are you supporting access to new technologies and innovations to improve climate resiliency?
That's a complicated question. So first and foremost, you have to have those technologies and those innovations, and you have to make sure that the scientists working on them are aligned with the policy objectives being set generally for the sector, but also that are sort of very much aware of the practical application of those technologies and those innovations, and also the need for them to help with maintaining or increasing yields, or certainly contributing to the profitability of a farming enterprise. And so science cannot be developed in the vacuum. At Agriculture Canada, the way that this is done is that our science branch gets together regularly, and they've recently published the latest version of this, which is sort of their science plan, where they sit down and they look at the priorities of the department, priorities of the sector, and they realign their scientific resources to address the specific issues. And the last science plan very much focuses on the environment and sustainability. This is recognized as one of the priorities. The other way that you do it is by funding outside partners or establishing partnerships in the science field. We have a number of programs at Agriculture Canada where we invest directly in this kind of scientific research, and we set the parameters, the terms and conditions for people to apply for these. The last thing that the government does too is sort of setting larger sums of money where entire value chains can apply for development of innovation to sort of, help producers, but in the context of the broader chain. And those are massive investments, and they're quite complex, but a lot of different funding has to be available. I would say that taking into account the context is essential. So innovations and technology have to be part of the broader picture. And now I'm back to the policy process. So how do you support innovation and technology? And how do they create, so how does the broader agri-food value chain create a pull, right? And we've been discussing about Scope 3 emissions, but science and tech has a role to play in that. And then finally, something that we're really trying really hard at Ag Canada is to sort of bring in the producers throughout this conversation of priorities and where the funds should go, One of our novel approaches was to develop an advisory committee for the development of the sustainable ag strategy, where we've brought on 22 select stakeholders with the help of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, who's been a tremendous partner in bringing everybody around the table and having open and candid conversations about whether this is working for producers. We've had some really fun discussions where, you know, people disagree, but the department takes it all down and we take it back, and then we have all perspectives documented. The goal is twofold. Number one, we want our policies, including sort of future investments in science and tech, to be directly informed by the producers and their associations. We don't want to consult them and then go off in our dark hole, right, as governments tend to do, and then reemerge a year later saying this is what we've done. So we meet with them every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. We present how the work has progressed. They can give us sort of like on-the-spot feedback, and then we adjust. So this is a new thing that we're trying, and it's working quite well for now. We'll see where it takes us. And I believe this is an approach that has to continue in the future. Once you've set your strategy, once you've set your investments, why not continue to have those close conversations every month or so? Just, you know, see how things are working, what tools are missing on the farm to implement the technologies, what knowledge is missing. What can governments specifically do better to support the entire project?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for highlighting the importance of bringing farmer voices into the labs, into the fields where the researchers are working and giving that on-the-spot advice. Looking forward to understanding more and how that works along the way. So next we'll go to Christian, and rightfully so, as we just heard Sophie mention, as part of the Global Farmer Network. How has this being part of this organization helped you, and are there policies and practices that you've learned about in other countries that you would like to adapt for use on your farm?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple interesting points of being part of the Global Farmer Network. I mean, one is it does remind me that we're pretty blessed in Saskatchewan with some of the technologies that were almost developed there first. Zero Till was one of the first companies that ever developed it, is literally 12 miles from my farm. So some of the technologies around zero till and sectional control and variable rate and zone mapping, you know, lots of which Canada and Australia are both leading the world at, is partly because it is low rainfall zones, and it was the right thing to do to take care of our soils, right? And I kind of always say that the only people we actually screw over if we don't do a good job of farming our soils is our grandkids. I don't believe too many farmers that would actually do that. So have we seen too many processes? I would say because we're pretty lucky that way, what it's probably done the most for me is realizing unintended consequences of bad policy or bad assumptions. So a couple great friends of mine are two female farmers out of Africa and Zimbabwe, and you start talking about, you know, one, her biggest risk is farm security, getting to and from the farm. The other one's biggest risk is the storage of her grain, because it's their bins were weaved together trees. We can't even fathom that in Saskatchewan. It's not something that we understand. So let's make sure that we don't put policies in place that absolutely inhibit smallholder farmers in other countries, let alone limit production, you know, in countries that have already done a really good job of the production. We had other great discussions around kind of the importing and exporting of high protein wheat. So should we import all wheat into all countries? But then COVID really let us know that supply chains can be demolished. And if countries can't at least grow a sustainable amount of one crop, it literally creates famine. So let's not forget that point. So I think that's been the biggest part of the Global Farmer Network is having global theory and regional strategies, right? And then to take into consideration all size of farms. I don't care if they're 1 acre or, you know, 100,000 hectares that you see with some of the groups in South America. And then, you know, lastly is just those points to openly communicate with the different groups around the world, to one, pull in innovation, two, see different risks, right? So our last meeting, a bunch of farmers out of, say, Germany and Scandinavia were talking about some of the risks of some of the policy that had been put in place, that they were shutting down certain animal barns because they just actually couldn't be profitable. It's really hard to go green if you're in the red, right? And so if policy puts us in the red, there is going to be no innovation, right? But on the next stage, you know, we had certain new innovations coming available in Canada and in Saskatchewan specifically that we needed to share with the world because we weren't telling our story. We were just kind of using it in closed circumstances. So those would be the biggest benefits, I think, of the Global Farmer Network, and just realizing that it's every farmer's responsibility in the world to feed the world, not just one and not just one area. And we have to ensure that our decisions don't limit other areas as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you just had the quote of the day. Hard to go green if the farm is in the red. That's an amazing, amazing statement and so on point. So let's go to David, to you next. What are the biggest climate challenges facing you on your farm, and how can policy help? And let us know a little bit about what you see as the role that decision makers here at COP28 play in the policies that will be implemented in Australia.
Well, not too dissimilar to what Christian just said, but we're very blessed where we are because we are in the developed world. So we're business people. We run a business and it happens to be agriculture. So the utopia of saying that we grow food for the world is quite right as a byproduct, but the actual fact is I run a business, so I make business decisions. I could quite easily grow as much food as I wanted to and give it away, and that'd be fantastic. My bank manager may not agree with me, but I would have that warm, fuzzy feeling. But the fact is, we grow food for sale, and we want to try to get into markets that are very valuable to us. For us, that means that we are trying to value add our product, and that means that we are looking to get credentials. That means that we are looking to try to get that province. Now, the made in whatever country you are is one thing, and you've got to have your photosanitary to get it out of your country into the next, which is fantastic. And in Australia, we're very blessed that we don't have a lot of pests and diseases because essentially we're an island in the middle of nowhere. It's very hard to get to, but that's also a benefit. So for us, when we talk about innovation and our challenges are, it's not only just on farm, it's the fact that as the climate's changed, our disease profile is changing. We're having more pressures and seeing more introduced species, insects, pests, diseases on our doorstep that were never a concern for our system. And that's adding cost to my business. And I, once again, unfortunately, I'm a capitalist, but I do have some motivations beyond that, which is I like to see and want to be in a community that thrives. That's both my local community as well as the nation, let alone the broader globe. And in many ways, that's the great thing about agriculture. We do share a lot of information. And for us, sharing that information comes organically if it's on Twitter, which I'm pretty sure is the farmer's most commonly looked up mechanism to Google an issue between ourselves. But secondly, we do love our land. We do love the stewardship. But the cost of doing some of the adoption of policy, the actual capital that inquires, it has to be financially advantageous for us. Otherwise, we can do all this great work but get no benefit out of it. We can do some really fantastic things, lock up a percentage of our farm to make sure we hit our carbon credits, but we take away the productivity, which is the reason why we run our businesses, what our purpose is. And for us, under the national farmers, we've got this grand plan to actually produce more value for the farmers. And that's not just producing more food, but it's making sure we're extracting value from things such as our credentials, such as making sure that we are getting access to the premium markets that we want to try to maintain a cost of production at. And that doesn't happen by ignoring all of the international policy. It means that we have to be engaged in it. And we have to make sure that we're driving some of this as well, because quite frankly, we can't afford, in the business sense, not to be producing the right products. But then on the policy sense, if the settings aren't right, if it goes against our ability to extract funds or the ability for us to place product in that market, we have no future. And once again, like Christian said, we're doing it in many ways underneath the family farming system, which is becoming more corporatized. We now have multi-generations becoming more specific in our management processes, in the way that we are very targeted in how we both bring in. But the most important part is we can't pick up our farm and shift it somewhere else. So we have to deal with the climate. We have to deal with the challenges that are faced to us and adapt. And the only way we can do that is through research and development, investing in having a good relationship with our policymakers, but then also understanding what our customers need, because ultimately they're our major stakeholder in our businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that consumer point there in on the end, and how if you're not economically viable on the farm, that cost has to go somewhere. And in the end, if the farm closes, it's still going to have an impact on the consumer. So the consumers, all of us here in the audience, are ultimately on the other end of all of this. So it's so important that we have all these conversations and address some of these issues early on. So again, over to Samira. I'd like to change it a little bit here and talk a little bit more about how can public policy effectively balance transitioning towards sustainable food systems while guaranteeing food security, and what role should the private sector play based on what you've heard now from a couple farmers and a government official on the panel?
Of course, this is very interesting, and this is what I said, that I'm glad to hear from them and to learn their best practices to contribute to this food security worldwide. So from Africa, Middle East, again, our smallholders, which is the engine of the food production in our region, needs support and help. And this is not only for the smallholder now, but also to support the young generation and the future farming to motivate them to manage this agribusiness by the end, you know. So to help them to grow food, to feed their community, and to contribute to food security in the region, and also contributing to less importation of food from outside Africa. For that, I believe that agricultural solution technology can really help smallholder farmers to contribute to the food security, as other farmers worldwide in the biggest country, productive country, are doing. So our farmers have the right to access to the technology and innovation such other farmers worldwide, Canada, US. For that, I believe there is 5 action, of course. First of all, is enabling evidence policy which ensure a green transition localized to Africa. As you mentioned, some of the policy which suits for continent not necessarily will be suited for our region and countries. Talking about, for example, reducing pesticide in a region where the half of farmers don't use crop protection, it's not resonates realistic with what happened in the ground. Secondly, for me, it's very important that food security policy has to be on the top of the priority of our leaders and multilateral organization. It should to be included on all these climate action policies. And thirdly, I think it's very important also that to support our farmers by all the training that can help them to use safely our innovation and technologies. And this has to be happened through partnership, public-private or private-private, to ensure that we can really reach all the farmers in the region. The fourth point, which is very important, is to remove the barriers of trade. Again, to motivate young farmers to be farmers and to run their agribusiness, we have to give them the ability to trade, so to be competitive. This is very important. In Africa also, we are hoping that the entire barrier of trade can be removed, and with that will ensure not only food security, but to contribute to food carbon emission by the agricultural system. So very important that policies promote the partnership private-public with action that can be implemented in the ground, which really will impact the behavior of smallholder farmers. Sometimes I feel the COP or in all these biggest manifestation, it's more input-driven rather to be output-driven. So very important that we come with action program that can be implemented in the ground to really help the livelihood of farmers and to contribute to the sustainable agriculture in our region.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Those are such important points. So we'll go through another round of questions here with our panel. Let's go to Sophie next. You've heard a lot of the conversation here from 2 farmers on the panel about the importance of working with public policy, and you've made some of those points yourself. How can you ensure that Canada's policy strategies are meeting climate objectives without compromising food security, productivity, farmer livelihoods?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, the one that we work on every day, frankly. So I've talked a little bit about how we develop our policies, but I think ultimately, I think certain choices have to be made, frankly. And in developing policies, we always sort of keep in mind this triangle, right, of sustainability, so environmental sustainability, economic viability, and then social benefits. The question is, can we tackle all three at the same time? It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think that's where certain choices have to be made. We're at the COP. We're talking about climate change. I think there's an urgency to act, and we all recognize that in producing money, in maintaining a viable business, we also have to do it sustainably, and more, that will be part of business models, invariably. So I think, the Government of Canada is choosing to sort of like really focus on this point of the triangle, but consistently applying an economic lens at every step of the way. So build in the economic principles from the start, not developing environmental policies, getting to the end, and then, wondering if it applies or, not it being an afterthought. It has to be built in. And then other things, that the government needs to do is really think about what do the farmers need? What have we heard from them? It's not for lack of feedback from the farming community. We've heard them loud and clear. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the unique role that a government can play? What part do we play in all of this? I've talked about direct incentives, those amounts are limited invariably. So I think we can play a leadership role on data, and we aim to do that in coming years, sort of getting everybody on board in working in the same direction with the same technologies for data gathering so that the reporting, the verification can be standardized and can be used for multiple purposes. So for the on-farm decision-making tools, in determining what technologies will work best for your operation, and then for also reaping the economic benefits from all of the climate change impacts that you may have on your farm so that you get rewarded for that. Governments can help in spreading factually what the ag sector is already doing, has been doing, really sort of demonstrate to the world the performance of Canada. Constantly work to sort of identify new trade avenues where sustainability may be an economic opportunity. We can play a role in designing knowledge transfer programs or sort of investing directly in on-the-ground resources for regionally specific advice on sustainability. And then we can sort of try to get everybody on board on those infamous partnerships, working together. There's a lot of money to be spent in Canada. The agri-food sector has said, they want to invest in sustainability. The big question is, where can we play our part? What is our role? I think government has a role to play in bringing everybody together. So hopefully in doing all of this, we get to that end result of increased production, feeding the world, but maintaining the health of the farming businesses in Canada.
Thank you, and thank you for walking us through how complex the decision-making and the processes can be for public policymakers. And Christian, reflecting on what you just heard from Sophie, how has policy helped or hindered you as a farmer in Australia as you've strived to become more climate resilient on your farm?
My donkey died in Canada, not in Australia, but we were talking about this ahead of time. I say that as a joke, but you do realize all farms are based because the donkey ran out of water. Like, we didn't pick, hey, this is the best place to do business. It got off the train, walked till it ran out of water. There's the farmstead, right? And we can't move it. So, when it comes to policy, I'm on the record for a number of times saying that I think the biggest risk on my farm in the next decade, hands down, bad policy. Not Mother Nature, not equipment prices, not commodity prices, bad policy. I also think we need to do some differentiation between policymakers that are doing all the work on it and politicians. It's just because I don't always believe that everybody's working in the same path, taking the same advice for farmers. I do agree that there's a lot of discussion between policymakers and the agriculture groups and farmers working towards a long-term plan, but we also can't stick our heads in the sand and not understand that politicians have 4-year terms in Canada, and agriculture is less than 1% of the vote. And that's a risk. And that doesn't always match what the policy coming up is. And your triangle, I thought, was really good. And who's focused on what part of the triangle, right? Because right now, you're right, we're at a conference where it's very focused on the environmental outcomes. And yet, we talk about that the best way to have great environmental outcomes on our farm is for me to be economically sound. If you increase farm income, that income will be invested in the best ways and most innovative ways to do a better job of our land. Because we can't produce more if our land goes bad. So literally, the higher farm income is, the more money that gets invested in climate and carbon policy. It literally is the best way to do it. If there's no money to invest other than to buy groceries, it's not going to get put into it, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done on it, but it's also why I think you're seeing farmers at a conference like COP28, because to be frank, policy scares us. It can literally cause us to not be able to manage our business the way we need to manage it for our kids and grandkids to take over, right? So, I think we need to focus on the economic side. It needs to be really important, but we also can't have that focus if we're not here to talk about it. And I think there's different areas where that collaboration can take place between farmers, private and public, right? I think when we look at some of the talk about baseline and how we're going to develop that, we need to understand one of our biggest risks is to absolutely cut the legs out of the innovative and most progressive farmers that have pushed the line and have already implemented a bunch of these practices, literally led the way on it. If there isn't some sort of a payment for past ecosystem services, they're going to say, so what? So now you care about what I did, but the last decade you didn't care, right? They literally will make bad decisions to go backwards so they can now fall into proper policy, right? I think there needs to be incentives for smaller farms and small farm holders to be able to simply afford some of the technology to be able to do it. We're lucky on our farms that we can afford to buy a zero-till drill. Well, some farms can't afford that. That's the one main reason they haven't implemented it. So that's a great place, for government to get involved with those types of incentives. And I truly, from a personal standpoint, don't believe that you can tax me into good behavior. I think there's ways to incent and have goal congruence. And we all have the vision of the better purpose of we want to have the most sustainable products on the earth. I don't care whether you're from Canada or from Australia or from Saskatchewan. That's what we want. I want everybody in this room in a decade to take a picture of a Q code, whether it's on the beer you're drinking in the bar or the loaf of bread you're buying at the grocery store or the pasta you're about to eat at your restaurant, and see my 9-year-old daughter running through my crop, running her hands through the crop and feeling it come out of the semi into the auger, because that's how proud of what we grow we are. But as you said, I also want to sell it. And if you can take a picture of that Q code and see my whole story, there's probably a chance you'll pay more too. Like it's a double-edged sword. But I'd rather be honest about it.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing that picture into our minds from your farm and what you're striving for in your business and for your family. And I think at this point, it'd be good to go to David for the next question. And again, a little bit of a policy angle here. If you could talk to us a little bit about how policy has been a benefit or a barrier on your farm, and really bring us into your thoughts on transitioning to low carbon economies and how that may offer both opportunities and risks for agriculture.
To be honest, I reckon a lot of politicians don't understand production. It's it is one of the greatest challenges that we have. When we have got idealisms creeping into the way that we view world, food is no longer something you consume. Food is now a lifestyle choice. Food is now, you can get organic water and gender-free wheat. Like this is what this is the world we live in now. So we sometimes forget what we're actually meant to be trying to achieve, and that is high quality food at the lowest price possible that's safe. That's ultimately a great outcome. If we can do that with our triple bottom line, environment, business, people, that is the ideal sweet spot. But we have a lot of pressures being put on politicians that are less than 4-year terms to come up with how am I going to put my statement on this policy, on this arena, on this topic. And sometimes it feels like it's a rush for a headline. You sit back and go, wow, did you actually understand the consequence of what you say in a statement and then transfer that into a policy? It's like, man, if this was a cartoon, I'd find it amusing, but it's my business. And I agree, like politicians and their agendas don't necessarily align with a longer term view. And that's something that I don't think is unique to any country. But the problem is, how do you sell a vision? How do you describe something to somebody so they buy in over the course of a generation of what is good for not only you as a farmer, but as the community? What is a good outcome? And I guess the issue around, or not the issue, the challenge around animal welfare is a classic example for us. It goes beyond environmental, it goes beyond production. And now goes on to the challenge of what is socially acceptable. What is actually, how much of an omelette can we make without cracking the egg? And it can be frustrating in farmland because we just want to get on with the job. But now we've got an external pressure that we need to also make sure that we're very cognizant of. And how do we do that in a meaningful way? Some people are excluding themselves. Other people are trying to adapt, and it comes down to, once again, the costs and opportunities. So for us, when we talk about the environment, it's not just the physical environment that we're now adapting to, it's the social environment. And that also comes down to our business environment and how we're structuring ourselves, because I don't necessarily think that we make the best production decisions because we are trying to adhere or mold into something that's probably unsustainable in the longer term, but really great to get elected or get a headline by. But when you take a big step back and go, well, what am I actually trying to achieve here? What's the actual output of what this decision is? It's a little bit of a scarier situation. So I'm very positive. I'm optimistic that we'll find a solution. But I think that the pendulum as it swings has got probably a broader arc than it's ever had. And it will take time to find the most practical way forward. But I do feel there's pain both in those three areas. Once again, environment, business, people. Not all three can serve underneath the spectrum that we're trying to accommodate now. For me as a business person who runs a farm, I'm trying to make sure that I've got the next generation in mind. That's why we're here today. That's why we're having the conversation. But to be quite honest, I can't fit everything that's been demanded on me into the future. Something's going to change, something's going to give, and that might be my expectations, but it might be the expectations of a parliamentarian or possibly their constituents.
Thank you for that. It sounds like we need more farmers to become politicians.
Just more practical people. God, anyone who's worked in a governmental office should not be allowed to get into government. They have to have run a business. They have to have go on a paycheck. Because that's the reality. It's easy when it's not your money. It's just, sorry, you got me going.
Or anyone who works in agriculture has to go to a farm.
No, that's what we just did.
If you're making policy about agriculture, you need to be on a farm. You need to know how it works.
Because, hey, like, I've seen somebody do brain surgery on a documentary. Let me have a go. That's what they do to agriculture. It's like, frustrates me, sorry.
Well, and that's why we have farmers' federations and representatives such as yourself, too. And so the last question is part of our moderated panel. I'd like to go back to Samira and talk a little bit about Africa.
Yeah.
And we heard earlier from Christian about smallholder farmers and some of his colleagues in the Global Farmer Network and the challenges they face. Africa really has the potential to feed the world in itself thanks to having the planet's largest reserve of arable land. What policies need to be put in place to make this a reality?
Yeah, thank you. Look, hearing from our global farms and their challenges that face. Imagine smallholder farmers in Africa, and again, we are in a continent where 16% already face food insecurity in Africa. So the challenges that they are faced is more and more increasingly severe for them. I believe that our leaders our policymakers have they have the responsibility to work on policies framework that will allow smallholder farmers to access to innovation and technology is very crucial. In Africa, for example, we need now to introduce the gene editing technology that they can help them to adapt their practice farming face of heat, drought, and all these challenges they are faced. They have, again, they have a right to access to all your technologies that the other farmers worldwide, they already access. And we need also, as you mentioned, we have this potential to feed the world and the continent, but still difficult to unlock this potential. And the basis, again, is about the right policy that can be adapted to the local condition in our region, the needs that our smallholder farmers work together on green transition localized to our continents, work together around concrete programs that can be implemented in country that can really help the farmers and the new generation of farmers. So policies are key. Learning from the best practices around the world, capitalize on them and to implement it in Africa, Middle East is also one thing that can really be implemented in our region.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. And that wraps up our panel discussion. So I think we have some time, just a few minutes. We might be able to take one or two questions from the audience. Anyone have a question for our panel?
Say your name and who you're with, please.
Hi, I'm Dan Donner. I'm from Carbon Asset Solutions Canada. And my question is to the two farmers. And could you just speak briefly about what you think the role and your experience has been with agri-food companies, acknowledging the fact that you're both really established regenerative farmers, and you touched on the fact that you've been doing it for a decade or more, but what's the role and what's your experience been? Because you're likely selling to the same groups.
To tread lightly, I think they've got us a lot of solutions to a problem that they're trying to find a fit for in the carbon space. And it all comes down to what's in it for them, not necessarily what's in it for us. And being the agricultural community, it does feel like, unfortunately, because we have a lot of conversation around what is regenerative. We have a lot of conversation around what's sustainable. We have a lot of conversation around we can measure X, Y, Z for you. But they don't actually have the conversation of how do we share the benefit. And for us, it is about making sure we've got a really firm grasp on what is that carbon number that we are, making sure that we understand what our opportunities are within our own businesses, but the external pressures as well for us. How do we ensure that we're picking the best source of N? Because N drives a lot of our productivity, but yet my choices of it is whatever ships in the port at the moment. And that actually has probably got as much influence on my footprint as what I do on farm. So yeah, we've had really good experiences with meeting people and having great innovation and having great discussions. Some of them are charlatans, others are really genuine. But the reality is we can control a lot in our environment. It's the Scope 3 stuff that, for my Scope 3, not everyone else's Scope 3, because when they look at agriculture, it's about the Scope 3 we're giving them. It's not about what they're giving us. And that's the part that I really get frustrated in this conversation, that as ag, we need to have as much opportunity to get carbon zero products on our farm as what we're actually selling.
Yeah, so I think, I'll start with the opportunity. I mean, I've publicly said I think the opportunity is that I sell as much carbon as I do any other crop. I fully believe that. The world wants carbon, and, we're working through the science, but there's already science, especially in Western Canada, but Canada in general, that we sequester more carbon than we emit. But there's two big revenue streams that I think are possible. One is for emission reduction. Two is for the carbon inset/offset market. I'll maybe talk more about insets because you're focusing on the agri-food value chain, which then obviously the insets can become fairly lucrative if they just don't take them, right? The risk I think you're trying to get to is how do they maybe just get lost in trying to get to a net zero, supply chain. And I do believe we can interchange the term for 2030 climate crisis or scope 3 crisis. They've kind of culminated together and rolled into a ball, depending on who you're talking to, right? There's promises that have been made that we didn't know how we were going to meet, right? And everybody agrees that we need to focus on climate, but those two things have kind of become interchangeable. So how do we ensure that farmers get their share of the opportunity of meeting scope 3 emission issues, right? So, you know, all I can do is talk about what we're doing personally. So, I mean, we've partnered with the CANZA group, which is Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agriculture in Canada, and that includes 5 of the big, you know, agri-food supply chain. We have RBC, Loblaws, Nutrien, McCain's, and Maple Leaf are all some of the founding partners. We have academics involved from U of S and Guelph. We have the Smart Prosperity Institute and Nature United, so that hopefully you're kind of getting all viewpoints with the goal of having a simple MRV system, right? Because acres are going to be what solve some of our carbon sequestration and climate issues, not individual farmers. So how do we get it scalable over mass acres, right? And the easiest way is it to be simple. If only 1% can participate, it's an absolute waste of time. So we have to get it simple. So that's step one, is to get to this MRV system, of which then the science proves here's how much carbon I sequestered on an annual basis based on crop. From what we've learned, everybody in the room get used to it being more like a 3 to 5 year term, because water cycles highly affect annual sequestration. It'll be more of a 3 or 5 or 10 year term. You probably know this better than I do, right? And then what are the key things I can do for emission reduction? Because it's a real easy low hanging fruit where both government incentives and agri-food company incentives can hit some pretty easy targets really quickly, right? And I mean, but I think there's some great things out there that lots is doing already. I mean, like, we've treated nitrogen forever. I mean, I have a phosphate that I use that is pulled out of human wastewater plants. It's deemed organic. I'm not an organic farm. But is there a better story for me to tell to the world? Congratulations, I'm cleaning your phosphates out of your personal manure, out of the city's wastewater plant, putting it into my ground to grow my crops to feed the world. It's a pretty good life cycle of agriculture. It's a pretty good story to tell, right? So there's a lot of different opportunities out there that I think if we look for them, there's a lot of things to capture. And I mean, the one thing we all have to be excited about the carbon space is there is a lot of money in it. And I'm sorry, the easiest way to create innovation is put a bunch of money and a bunch of smart people in the same room and don't let them out the door till they have good ideas, right? If you just have smart people or you just have money, it doesn't work. You need both, right? So put them in a room, lock them up, and leave. And I think COP28 is trying to do that.
Great. Instead of going to another question, I think we'll just do a rapid round, 15 seconds each. You're at COP28. What's your most important action that needs to happen after you leave here? We'll go to Samira first.
Yeah, thank you. So, ensure that food security is in the top of the priority of our leaders, governments, to ensure that they can take the right measure program to be implemented in the region for this green transition to Africa, and to enable policies, framework, ensuring agricultural solution, equitable access to the technology for farmers in Africa, Middle East.
David.
That agriculture is involved in the global climate conversation, that we are actually seen as people who can actually manage and help with the challenges ahead. And then secondly, that sustainability shouldn't become a trade barrier between nations.
Sophie.
Yes. Well, I would say that a priority for us is to ensure that all policy development in Canada works also with what other countries are doing around the world. And I find that COP is an excellent opportunity to sort of have our ear to the ground to see, you know, what Australia is doing, the African continent is doing, and you know, start creating those networks and conversations with other governments, with other like associations of farmers in other countries, to make sure that not only are we developing an MRV that works in Canada, but we're going to be able to plug into like a world model and maintain our economic opportunities that way.
And Christian, what's the most important action after we leave here?
Yeah, I'd have two. One is that sustainability is not just soil and not just climate, right? It's land, financial statements, rural communities, and the industry when it comes to agriculture. If nobody will live in rural parts of countries, there are no farmers. We can't implement half of what people want. Point number two, get your fingernails dirty, right? If your fingernails are dirty, it means you've been in a field, and I trust people that are in the soil beside me, even if that's one day out of the year. if you want to work with agriculture, build trust. Real easy way to do that, come to the field.
Thank you for that. And it's hard to go green if the farm is in the red. Join me in thanking the panel, everyone.